Hi, it's me, Trudy from Compulsive Overreader, and I am back once again at the end of the month with the roundup of all the books I read in March. You can probably tell that these clips are going to have been filmed at different times because you'll notice throughout the video my hair changing length and color, but I feel it's visually tied together by the fact that throughout it I'm wearing the coolest t-shirt that I've ever owned. Possibly the coolest t-shirt anyone's ever owned. Anyway, March is kind of a weird month for me reading-wise, and this is where some people who've been following me all along may start to fall away and go, wait, what kind of book review blog is this? All of March this year fell within the season of Lent, and I have a long-standing tradition for the past several years of giving up fiction for Lent and using the time to focus on some of the nonfiction that I should read but too often don't get around to. And it's usually kind of a mixed bag of, I try to tackle something heavy and theological and some other stuff with maybe some spiritual angles and also some interesting memoirs, so that makes it kind of a different month. The Idolatry of God by very controversial, I guess you'd call him theologian, although he's a very popular level writer, Peter Rollins, deals with some really tough ideas. I'm not sure I agree with all of them, but I found it interesting to wrestle with. There's a lot more than I can say in a 30-second recap, so definitely check the link in my description to the blog where you'll find a more lengthy discussion of this book, which is challenging and interesting, and even if you don't agree with it, you should read it. Not sure if you can see this cover, but I was surprised I couldn't find a copy of this one in the bookstore because while it was popular when it came out about less than a year ago, it's received an understandable bump in popularity from recent events. The Pope Who Quit by John M. Sweeney. No, it has nothing to do with Pope Benedict. It's actually the true story of the medieval Pope Celestine V, I think, who was, up until recent events, the only pope in history to have resigned the job after a mere 15 weeks in office and 15 not very successful weeks. So, interesting story. Whether or not you've been following recent papal sagas, this is a historical one and well worth the read if you like history. Memoirs of an Addicted Brain by Mark Lewis. Not your typical addiction memoir. It is in some ways because he talks about his experience of drug abuse as a young man, but as he's now a neuroscientist, he also spends a bit of time in each chapter talking about what drug abuse actually does to your brain. Really interesting stuff. The Still Point of the Turning World by Emily Rapp was probably, out of the books I've read this year during Lent, the one that will stay with me the longest. It's a memoir. I read a lot of memoirs. This is a very powerful one, written by a woman who has the gift of being able to bring her experience to life in an incredibly powerful way. Emily Rapp had a son who was born with a very serious genetic disorder, which meant that his life was going to be very short. She knew this from the time he was 9 months old, and it's really a meditation on how to parent a child that you know is dying, which of course for any parent is heartrending to even think about, but it really makes you reflect on how much of our parenting is focused on the future and has to be focused on the future, but what if all that was taken away and all you had was the now? Emily Rapp is a very powerful writer and she's lived through a very powerful experience, so the two together just make riveting reading. I really recommend it highly. It's really frustrating that I can't even get a cover image up on the screen to show you, and I'd really like to have a physical copy, but I can't even find one in the library because I'd like to show you the heft, the physical size of the book that just about sank me this month, and the book that is solely responsible for the fact that I have a much shorter book list in March than I generally do. I had decided some time ago that I was going to read Robert Eisenman's great 1,000-page tome, James the Brother of Jesus. I wrote a novel about James the Brother of Jesus a couple of years ago. This is something totally different. It's a scholarly examination of all the texts, including, and in fact focusing mainly on the extra-biblical texts outside the Bible about James the Brother of Jesus, and a lot of stuff about the Dead Sea Scrolls and Eisenman's theories that James the Brother of Jesus is really the righteous teacher in the Qumran scrolls. Now, I'm obviously not an expert in this area, but in general, I thought Eisenman's arguments were very weak and they often seemed far-fetched to me. I like to be challenged by big, thick, scholarly books, especially if they introduce ideas that I'm unfamiliar with or even that I disagree with, because I love being exposed to new ideas. But this one, you know, Eisenman is considered by people in his field to be a little bit out there and a little bit wacko, and I have to say I kind of agree after reading this book. Was not impressed. However, if you're interested in this kind of thing, there is a very, very, very long and detailed review on my blog. If you're watching this review on YouTube rather than on the blog, there is a link in the description to my blog where you can engage with my opinions about Robert Eisenman and James the Brother of Jesus. My classic for the month was A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I did read this years ago, didn't remember a lot about it except that I kind of had a big crush on Sidney Carton, and I kind of still do. It's really hard for me not to call this book A Tale of Two Titties, but it is still a great classic and I really enjoyed rereading it. Along with such a long, hard slog through the big, thick, scholarly book, it's a good thing that I had an enjoyable classic this month and also an absolute gem of a find in the poetry book I picked up this month. I actually am not all the way through it yet because I've been savoring them slowly, a few poems a day. I had been meaning every month to pick up the work of a different poet, but I was looking through the poetry shelves in chapters and I was just grabbed by this book. I love it physically and visually as well as for what it is, which is a collection of villanelles. If you don't know the villanelle, it's a very kind of odd and very restrictive and limiting poem form, but writers can do beautiful things with it. The one villanelle that almost everyone knows is Dylan Thomas's Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, Rage, Rage Against the Dying of the Light, and it's that motif of the little three-line stanzas with the two repeated lines that keep recurring throughout the poem that make a villanelle. I love them, but I'd only read a few. This collection has, I guess it probably has most of the villanelles ever written in English in it, and some of them are just gorgeous. And I am going to close this month by reading you my all-time favorite villanelle, The Waking, by Theodore, name I can't pronounce, poet. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. I learn by going where I have to go. We think by feeling. What is there to know? I hear my being dance from ear to ear. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Of those so close beside me, which are you? God bless the ground. I shall walk softly there and learn by going where I have to go. Light takes the tree, but who can tell us how? The lowly worm climbs up a winding stair. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Great nature has another thing to do to you and me, so take the lively air and lovely learn by going where to go. This shaking keeps me steady. I should know what falls away is always and is near. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I learn by going where I have to go. As usual, if you share or like or favorite or tweet or post on Facebook this video, you get a chance to win one of the books I read this month. So you do that, and I'll see you later this week with another Writing Wednesday video, and at the end of next month for April's Roundup, which will have a lot more fiction in it.